Most people think the woods are empty. They think the silence is just nothing. But they're wrong. In the American West, the tribes whisper about the Skinwalkers. In the Arab world, the elders warn you about the Jinn. Two different worlds, thousands of miles apart, yet they describe the exact same nightmare. These aren't just spirits, they are mimics. They live in the places where humanity ends, the deep canyons, the forgotten forests, the ruins. They can look like a deer, a wolf, or even your best friend, but they are never perfect. Look closer. The eyes are spaced just a bit too far apart. The voice has a metallic ring to it. The way they move, it's like a puppet being pulled by wrong strings. But the most dangerous thing about them isn't that they can look like us. It's that they know how we think. They know that if you're alone in the dark and you hear a familiar voice crying for help, your instinct is to run toward it. And that is exactly what they want. Because once you answer that call, once you acknowledge their presence, you've already broken the first rule of survival. This is the story of Aaron, Luke, and Tessa. They were experienced hikers. They knew the terrain, but they didn't know that out there, in the silence, something was practicing their voices, waiting for the perfect moment to attack them first.
I'm writing this exactly as I remember it. Every time I try to tell the story out loud, I find myself trying to clean it up or make it sound more dramatic, but that's not how it actually felt. It felt messy. It felt like a series of normal, everyday decisions that slowly stopped making sense. I'm not sharing this to be disrespectful to anyone's culture or to turn genuine beliefs into some form of entertainment. I'm using the specific word that the locals used when they warned us. Those quiet warnings that weren't jokes and weren't meant to just scare us. If you're from Arizona, you probably know exactly which word I'm talking about. If you aren't, then just understand this one thing. We headed into the backcountry thinking the wilderness itself was the only risk. We weren't out there looking for a story. We were just looking for a few quiet days away from our screens. We came back with something that I still can't categorize as bad luck or an overactive imagination, no matter how hard I try to convince myself. There were 4 of us. I'll just use first names because none of us want our full names attached to this. There was me, Mark. There was Luke, who's the kind of friend who carries way more medical gear than he actually needs because he's seen firsthand what happens when you're unprepared. There was Tessa, who is practical to a fault, a total geology nerd who picks up on details that most people would walk right past without a second thought. And then there was Aaron, who brings a camera everywhere he goes and treats documenting a trip like it's a fundamental part of the journey, not just an extra hobby. We weren't amateur hikers, and we weren't doing anything extreme. The plan was straightforward. A multi-day backpacking trip in eastern Arizona, up in the high country where the air gets thinner and the nights stay freezing even when the days are warm. It's the kind of forest that can swallow sound in a way that makes you feel like you had stepped into a different kind of silence. We chose a route that kept us strictly on public land the entire time. We were very careful about that. We weren't trying to be edgy or reckless, and we certainly weren't trying to wander onto any land where we didn't belong. We started near a small, unremarkable trailhead in the Apache-Sitgreaves area, the kind of spot that doesn't have a massive sign or a fancy visitor center. It was just a pull-off, a metal post displaying a trail number, and a few faded notices tacked to a corkboard. The trip was scheduled for September 29th, 2025 through October 2nd, 2025. 3 nights out with a hike back to the truck on the 4th day. We left a basic itinerary with our families. Luke had a satellite messenger and a paper map tucked into a waterproof sleeve. I, Mark, had a compass and a printed weather forecast. Aaron brought extra batteries, and Tessa had the kind of food that looked more like it was engineered in a lab than cooked in a kitchen. We did everything the boring way, which is exactly how you're supposed to do it. We reached the trailhead in the late morning on September 29th, 2025. The sky was high and crystal clear, the light bright but not harsh. It smelled like sun-warmed pine needles and dust, the kind of scent that makes you feel like you're breathing deeper without even trying. We checked the truck twice, locked it up, and took a photo of the spot and the mile marker on the road. We performed that little ritual you do when you want to be able to prove later that you were exactly where you said you were. Then we started hiking. The first day was completely normal. That's part of what makes the rest of this so difficult to explain. We walked and talked, and then eventually we fell into that comfortable silence people do once the rhythm of the trail settles in. The sound of boots on dirt, pack straps creaking, the soft clink of water bottles, and the occasional snap of a dead twig. We saw fresh elk signs in the meadows and heard them bugling faintly in the distance. It felt a bit early in the season for that, but it wasn't impossible. We watched a hawk riding a thermal above the tree line. We crossed a narrow creek that wasn't even on the map, shallow enough to step across, but cold enough that the air hovering above it felt like a completely different temperature. Around mid-afternoon, we filtered water, ate, and pushed on. We were aiming for a flat spot near a larger drainage we'd marked as a reliable water source. We wanted water, we wanted a clean campsite, and we wanted to do everything by the book. We set up camp before sunset around 6 p.m. in a small stand of trees just above the water line. You know the kind of campsite I mean if you've done this before. A patch of ground that's clearly been used, bare dirt with a few old fire scars. It was just far enough off the trail that you didn't feel like you were sleeping on a sidewalk, but close enough that you could find it again in the dark. We hung our food, pitched our tents in a rough line, and kept the cooking area well away from where we were sleeping. We did all the responsible stuff.
The first weird thing happened while it was still light out, and I want to state that clearly because it matters. This wasn't some spooky sounds at midnight cliché. This was late afternoon. The sun was still in the sky. Aaron was down by the creek rinsing out a pot, and I was tying off the bear hang. Luke and Tessa were comparing the map to the actual layout of the drainage. Everything was calm. And then, from further down the creek, we heard a voice. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't panicked. It sounded like someone talking normally, like a hiker just around a bend having a conversation with someone out of sight. It was a man's voice, low and steady. It carried strangely through the trees, fading in and out, as if the wind were moving it around. None of us could make out the words at first. Then there was laughter. Short, not joyful, more like someone giving a quick chuckle to themselves. Luke looked up and said, "Other campers." Tessa listened for a moment and shook her head. "It's just one voice," she said. "If he's talking, who is he talking to?" We all stood perfectly still and listened. The voice stopped. There was total silence. Then there was a sound like a rock hitting another rock, sharp and deliberate. And then, this is where I start to feel stupid even describing it, the voice came back, but it was closer. It sounded like it had moved without any accompanying sound of footsteps. It wasn't impossible, of course. People can walk quietly if they want to. Sound can play tricks, but the timing was completely off. It was as if someone had been down the drainage and then, in a blink, was up near the bend without any of the space in between. Luke, being Luke, called out. He didn't yell, he just used his normal, "Hey, you down there?" voice. No response. Aaron came up from the creek and asked, "Did you guys hear that?" He stopped mid-sentence because the voice started again. Now it sounded like it was on the other side of the creek right behind us. We all spun around at the same time. Nothing. Just trees, shadowy undergrowth, and the quiet hiss of the water. The voice stopped again. The hair on my arms stood up in that way that isn't quite fear yet, just total high alertness. Tessa finally said, "Okay, that's enough of that." We finished setting up camp and ate. We joked about it because that's what you do when something doesn't fit the picture. You try to make it fit by making it feel smaller. We told ourselves it was someone in the trees messing with the acoustics, or someone far away whose voice was carrying strangely through the drainage. We were in a place with canyons, bends, and water. Sound does weird things there. That's true. I still believe that's true. I'm just not sure it explains what happened next. After dinner, as the lights started to fade, we heard something moving around the edge of camp. Slow footfalls, careful. Not a deer, not an elk. You can tell the difference. Deer and elk move with a light, quick rhythm, and you'll hear the occasional hoof scuff. This sounded like someone deliberately placing their feet, testing the ground. It circled us in a half circle, staying just outside the range of our headlamps. Luke snapped his light on and swept the beam. It caught tree trunks and branches, but nothing else. No eye shine, no shape, just absence. The footsteps stopped. We waited. No more sound. We did the normal checklist: food hung, trash packed, no scented items in the tents. We zipped up and settled in. The creek noise was steady and comforting, and the wind in the pines was gentle. If you've ever slept out there, you know how quickly your body relaxes when the day has been long and your legs are exhausted. I fell asleep fast. I woke up to Luke whispering my name. Not loudly, not in a panic, just my name, Mark. It was close enough that it sounded like he was right next to my head. I sat up so fast my sleeping pad squeaked. I listened. In the dark, everything sounds louder inside a tent. My own breath sounded like a stranger's. I whispered, "Yeah?" No answer. Then, from outside the tent, I heard Luke whisper my name again. Same tone, same pacing, close. But Luke's tent was a few feet away, and I could hear him moving inside it right then, like he'd just sat up too. There was the sound of a zipper. Then I heard Luke's actual voice, the real one, low and tense. "Did you just say my name?" I didn't answer right away because my brain was trying to do the math. Aaron, in the next tent over, said, "Stop. Who's that?" The whisper came again from outside, and it wasn't my name this time. It was Tessa's. Tessa's tent rustled. Her voice was tight, not sleepy at all. "Nope. No. Absolutely not." Luke clicked his headlamp on and unzipped his tent, and I did the same. Light spilled into the trees. The creek glittered through the branches. Everything looked exactly like it had a few hours earlier, except now the shadows were deeper, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Luke stepped out, standing there in his socks, and immediately I wanted to grab him and pull him back in, because that was the dumbest possible time to be outside in just socks. He swept his light around, fast and controlled, like he was clearing a room. Aaron came out too, boots on, holding his trekking poles like they were something more than just poles. Tessa stayed in her tent, but unzipped it and aimed her light outward. We didn't see anyone. We didn't hear footsteps. We didn't hear breathing. The only sound was the water and the wind. And then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, we heard a call that sounded like a coyote. Except coyotes don't make sounds that clean. This was too perfect, too centered. It rose and fell in a way that felt rehearsed. It made the back of my throat go tight. Luke said, "That's not right." Aaron, who isn't easily rattled, whispered, "Record that." He lifted his phone and hit record. You could see the little screen glow in his hand. The night swallowed everything beyond our headlamp beams. The call came again, and then it cut off abruptly, like someone had slammed a door. We stood there for a long time, lights sweeping the perimeter. Nothing happened. Eventually, Luke said, "Back in. We're not doing this." We went back into our tents. We didn't talk much. We tried to sleep. I remember staring at the mesh ceiling and thinking about how fragile tents are, how they're basically just a suggestion of shelter. I kept telling myself over and over that it was an animal or a person messing with us or sound traveling, that there was an explanation that didn't involve anything that would make me feel ridiculous. Later, sometime after midnight, after 12 a.m., I heard something sniffing near my tent. Not loud or exaggerated, just that soft inhale-exhale rhythm, close enough that I could hear the wetness in it. I held my breath, because that's what you do when you're trying to disappear. The sniffing moved along the tent wall, slow. Then it stopped near the door. I heard a hand on the zipper. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking. I'd think it too, but I heard it. That little metal pull tab scraping against the teeth, the tiny tension of the fabric. It moved a fraction of an inch and then stopped, as if whoever was doing it realized it wasn't going to open easily without making noise. My whole body went ice cold. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I reached for my headlamp with fingers that felt clumsy and huge. The zipper didn't move again. The sniffing didn't come back. After a few seconds, I heard a footstep. One soft, careful step, then nothing. Morning came like it always does, indifferent and clean. The light made everything look normal again, which almost felt insulting. We all looked like we'd slept horribly. Luke's jaw was set tight. Tessa's eyes were red, like she'd been staring into the dark for too long. Aaron was quiet, and Aaron is usually the one who cracks a joke to reset the mood. We did a quick sweep of the camp area. There were no obvious prints around my tent, which was annoying because I wanted something concrete. But the ground was a mix of pine needles and hard-packed dirt. Unless someone steps in soft mud, tracks don't always show. Near the creek, though, where the soil was damp, Luke crouched and pointed. There were prints. Not deer, not elk, human. You could see the toes, you could see the ball of the foot, and what made my stomach drop wasn't just that someone had been barefoot near our camp in the night, it was the size. The footprint was too long, too narrow, like someone with unusually large feet, but without the broad shape you'd expect. The toes were splayed in a way that looked wrong, like the foot didn't quite match the way a human foot should bend. Luke measured it against his own boot and then looked up at us. "Someone walked here, barefoot," he said. Tessa scanned the tree line. "Or someone wanted us to think that," she said. Aaron, crouched nearby, quietly said, "Look." A few feet past the barefoot prints, the track pattern changed. The line of movement kept going, same direction, same pace, but now the prints looked like hooves. Not a clean deer hoof, more like a blunt, split-shaped, heavy and pressed deep. It was as if the person had been walking barefoot and then decided to switch to hooves in the very same stride. None of us said anything for a moment.
That silence was different from the nighttime silence. It was broad daylight, and we were staring at something we could actually point to. Luke stood up and wiped his hands on his pants. "Okay," he said, his voice controlled. "We're not staying 3 nights." No one argued. Even Tessa didn't argue, and Tessa argues on principle. We ate quickly, broke camp faster than we should have, and got moving.
The plan was to cut the route short and angle toward a different trail that would take us back out in 2 days instead of 3. It meant a longer second day and a harder third day, but it meant we'd be moving, not sitting in one place, waiting for the night again. The trail that morning felt like the same trail, but our brains weren't the same. Every snapped twig made us look up. Every shadow between the trees looked like a shape. We tried to keep a normal pace and not bunch up, but we stayed closer together than usual. We talked about normal things on purpose: work, family, stupid internet drama. Like keeping our voices steady would keep the world steady too. Around late morning, we saw another set of tracks crossing the trail, more barefoot prints, fresh enough that the edges were crisp. Aaron stepped off the trail to photograph them. Luke checked the map. Tessa muttered, "If this is some idiot prank, I swear." And then we heard something that made all of us stop at once. A whistle, 2 notes, a specific little pattern Luke uses sometimes to get attention without yelling, like when he's trying to get someone's eyes on a trail junction. Luke's head snapped up. His face went blank. "That was my whistle," he said. Aaron said, "Do it again." Luke didn't. He just stared into the trees. The whistle came again. Same 2 notes, same spacing, from somewhere ahead and off to the right. Tessa's voice went flat. "Okay, nope." Luke called out, "Hey!" No answer. The whistle came again, closer, but still off to the right, like whatever it was moving parallel to us, matching our pace. We picked up speed. The whistle stopped. For a while, nothing happened. The forest went back to being the forest. We started to breathe again. Then, in the early afternoon, we came around a bend and saw a man standing in the trail. He was alone. No pack, no trekking poles, no visible water bottle. He wore jeans and a dark hoodie, which is not how you dress for a backcountry hike out there, not if you're spending the day walking. He stood with his hands down at his sides, looking at us like he'd been waiting. Luke slowed down first. I felt my own pace change without even thinking. Aaron lifted his camera slightly, not obviously, just enough that he could start recording if he wanted to. Tessa stayed behind Luke, which is also not like her. She's the one who steps forward. The man said, "You're a long way out." His voice was calm, too calm, not friendly, not hostile, just flat. Luke did the polite thing. "Yeah," he said. "You okay? You out here with a group?" The man tilted his head like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "My group's behind me," he said. We looked past him. The trail behind him was empty. Tessa asked, "How far behind?" The man's eyes moved to Tessa's face, and his mouth twitched like he almost smiled but didn't. "Not far," he said. Luke said, "Do you need water?" The man's gaze flicked to Luke's pack strap, to that satellite messenger clipped there, then back to Luke's eyes. "I'm fine," he said. "You should keep moving."
Aaron, who does not like being told what to do by strangers, said, "We are." We tried to walk around him. The trail was narrow there, brushed in tight on both sides. The man didn't move. He just watched us. Luke stopped a few feet away, not close enough to be grabbed, but close enough to be heard. Luke said, "We're just going to pass." The man's eyes shifted, and for a second, I swear his pupils looked wrong, like they didn't catch the light the way they should. It was quick,
It could have been a shadow. It could have been my brain hunting for something to blame. But it's what I remember. Then he said, very softly, "Luke." Luke froze. We hadn't said Luke's name. Tessa said, "How do you know his name?" The man didn't answer. He just looked at me, and his head tilted again. Then he said my name, Mark, perfectly. Same tone as if he'd known me for years. My mouth went bone dry. Aaron whispered, "No." Luke's voice got harder. "Who are you?" The man's mouth opened slightly, like he was about to speak. And then, this is the part that still makes me feel sick. He made a sound that wasn't a word. It was like he was trying to shape the first syllable of something and just couldn't, like his tongue didn't know where to go. He closed his mouth again and just stared. Tessa stepped forward then, not close, but enough to force the moment. "Move," she said. One word, sharp, no politeness left. The man took one slow step backward off the trail, not to let us pass, just backward into the brush, like the trail didn't even matter to him. He didn't turn his body. He didn't step carefully like someone trying to avoid tripping. He just slid back into the trees, still facing us, eyes locked on ours. We walked past him fast, not running, but it wasn't a normal walk either. I could feel my heart beating in my neck. Aaron glanced back once. The man was gone. No sound of rustling leaves, no crack of branches, just gone. We didn't speak for a long time after that. When we finally did, it was Luke, and his voice was low. "That's not okay," he said. "That's not normal." We kept moving. We stopped only to filter water and eat quickly. We made sure no one walked off alone. We kept our heads up. The whole day felt like the forest was watching us through 1,000 little gaps between the branches. We reached a new campsite before sunset on September 30th. It was farther from water than we wanted, but on higher ground where the visibility was better. There was a small open area, not quite a meadow, but enough space that you could see shapes moving between the trees. We chose it on purpose. We were trying to remove variables. We set up our tents tight together. We didn't build a fire. We ate cold food. We hung the food bag anyway, even though it meant moving away from the tents, because we still believed in doing things the right way. Aaron played back the recording from the day, the part where the man said our names. The audio caught it as clear as anything. Our names spoken like someone reading off a list. When we listened to it, something in the tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't just that he knew them, it was the way he said them, like he didn't understand what a name was for, only that it was a sound that caused a reaction. Night came again. We tried to set rules. No one leaves their tent without waking the others. If we hear voices, we don't answer. If we hear someone calling for help, we verify with each other first. That last one felt awful to say out loud, but we said it anyway. We lasted maybe an hour before the rules were tested. It started with footsteps again, slow, circling. Then a cough, human, close, the kind of cough someone does when they're trying to get your attention without yelling. Then, from just beyond the edge of the clearing, a voice. "Tessa," it said. Tessa's breath caught so loudly I heard it through my tent wall. She whispered, "No." The voice came again, closer. "Tessa, come here." It sounded like her mother. I didn't know what her mother sounded like, and neither did Luke or Aaron, but Tessa did. And I heard it in the way her whole body reacted, the way her tent fabric shifted as she sat up hard, like she'd been hit. Luke whispered, "Tessa, look at me." We could see each other through the mesh, the thin walls, and the glow of our headlamps. Tessa didn't answer right away. She stared at her tent door like she could see right through it. The voice outside said softly, "Baby, come here. I can't find you." Tessa choked on a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's not her," she whispered. "That's not her." Luke said, "Stay in the tent." The voice shifted tone then. It became angry in an instant. "Tessa!" Just her name, hard, like a command. Then the footsteps got faster, a run, a circle around the clearing. Too fast for a human running through brush in the dark without making more noise. It sounded like something moving with total purpose, knowing exactly where the open spaces were, threading between trees like it had done it 1,000 times before. Aaron said, "I'm recording." I heard his phone start. I heard his breathing go shallow. Then the voice changed again. It became Luke's. "Hey," it said, from right outside my tent, close. "Open up. I need help." Luke was in his tent. I could see his headlamp glow. I could hear him swallowing. The voice outside said again, "Open up." The zipper on my tent door moved. Not much, just that little scraping pull, testing it, same as the first night. And I did the only thing my body would let me do. I shouted, not a word, just a loud, raw sound to break the moment. Luke shouted too. Aaron yelled something I can't even remember. Tessa screamed at the top of her lungs, furious. The zipper stopped. The footsteps bolted away fast, then stopped suddenly, as if whatever it was had simply vanished into the trees. We didn't sleep after that. We sat there with our headlamps on, wasting battery, because the dark felt 100 times worse than the risk of dead lights. In the small hours, around 2 in the morning, I heard something else that chilled me in a different way. Quiet laughter, close, like someone laughing into their hand so you couldn't hear it well. It wasn't joy, it wasn't even mockery, it sounded like practice. Morning on October 1st felt like waking up after a disaster you haven't fully understood yet. We were stiff, exhausted, and hungry in that hollow way you get when extreme stress burns through your calories. We packed up fast. We decided to hike out that day if we could, even if it meant pushing much longer than we had planned. That's when we realized something was missing. Luke's satellite messenger was gone. It had been clipped to his shoulder strap the day before. We all remembered it because we'd looked at it like it was a lifeline. Now the clip was empty. Luke tore through his pack, checked his pockets, checked the tent, checked the ground around camp. No messenger. Aaron said, "Maybe you took it off." Luke shook his head. His face had gone pale in a way I'd never seen before. "No," he said. "No, I didn't." We searched the clearing. We searched the brush line. Even though none of us wanted to step into the trees, we found nothing. Tessa said, "It took it." Aaron asked, "Who?" Tessa didn't answer. She just looked out at the trees like she expected eyes to blink open in the bark. We started hiking. I want to explain something about fear that I didn't fully understand until that day. There's the fear you feel in a moment, a sudden spike, and then there's the fear that becomes a constant background hum. It changes how you think. You stop being able to picture the next hour clearly. Your mind keeps jumping to the absolute worst version of every decision. That's what it felt like. We weren't panicking, but we were moving like people in a dream where all the rules were wrong. Around midday, we came to a stretch of trail that cut along a ridge with a view down into a wide drainage. The trees opened up enough that you could see for a long distance. It should have felt safer. It did, for about 5 minutes. Then we saw smoke, a thin thread at first, rising from somewhere below. Campfire smoke. Aaron stopped and lifted his camera. "Other hikers," he said, sounding hopeful. Luke frowned. "Fire restrictions are in effect," he said. "And it's windy," Tessa added. "Maybe someone just doesn't care about the rules," we debated. Part of us was desperate for the sight of other humans, while the other part wanted to avoid any unknown people entirely. In the end, we cautiously angled down toward the smoke, sticking to the trail. We called out as we approached, doing the polite thing so we wouldn't startle anyone. No answer. We stepped into a small camp area nestled near a bend in the drainage. There was a fire ring with fresh ash still radiating heat. There were 4 clear sleeping spots. It looked like someone had laid out ground cloths, but there were no tents, no packs, no food, and no people. It was just the suggestion of a camp, as if someone had staged a scene and then simply stepped away. Aaron walked closer, moving slowly. "This is weird," he said. Luke crouched down and touched the ash, pulling his hand back instantly. "Recent," he noted, "like this morning." Tessa scanned the ground. "Where are the tracks?" she asked. That was the thing. In the damp soil near the drainage, you should have seen footprints. You should have seen signs of movement, even if they were scattered. But the ground was oddly clean, almost like it had been brushed. Not perfectly, like a broom had been there, but like someone had dragged something over the dirt to soften the signs of their presence. Then Aaron said, "Guys," and his voice had that sharp edge again. He was pointing at something hanging from a low branch near the camp. It was Luke's satellite messenger. It was dangling from its clip at eye level, hung there deliberately like an authoring. Luke stared at it, frozen for a second. His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He stepped forward quickly, grabbed it, and checked it. The screen was on. The battery indicator was almost full, which made 0 sense because it had been out all night and Luke had been strictly conserving power. The message log was completely empty. No sent messages, no failed attempts. It was as if it had never been used at all. Luke swallowed hard. "It reset," he said. "Or something," Tessa replied. "Or maybe it didn't like being used." Aaron took photos of it in the tree before Luke had grabbed it. He photographed the camp and took video of the lack of tracks. He narrated quietly, making a record for later, stating the date, October 1st, 2025, and the time, around 1 p.m., so it would be captured. We left that camp fast, too fast. We didn't discuss what it meant because none of us wanted to give it weight by putting it into words. A couple of hours later, we reached a junction we'd marked on the map. We had two choices: a shorter route through a narrow canyon-like section with thick tree cover, or a longer route along higher ground with more exposure but better visibility. Under normal circumstances, we'd have taken the shortcut. That day, we chose visibility. We climbed. As the sun started to slide down, the wind picked up, bringing that sound like the forest was whispering in one long, continuous breath. We could see farther, but the distance didn't comfort me. It made me feel small. It made me feel watched from 1,000 different angles. As dusk settled in, we heard another voice.
This time, it was Aaron's. It came from behind us, down the trail we'd just climbed. "Aaron," it called in Aaron's exact voice. "Wait up." Aaron spun around so fast he nearly tripped. "That's not me," he said, his voice shaking. The call came again, closer. "Wait up." We didn't answer. We kept moving, our pace turning into a near jog. Packs were bouncing, breath was coming hard. The voice behind us matched our speed perfectly, but without the sound of anyone actually running on the trail. It stayed at the same fixed distance, like it was pinned to us, or like it was coming directly out of the air. Then it stopped, and for a moment, there was only the wind. And then, from ahead of us, somewhere we couldn't see yet, we heard Luke's specific two-note whistle pattern. Luke's face twisted as if the sound had physically hurt him. "No," he whispered. We stopped. All four of us stood in the middle of the trail in the fading light, listening. The whistle came again, and this time it sounded like it was right off the trail to our left, just inside the trees. Tessa whispered, "Don't." Luke said quietly, "No one move." A branch creaked, not a random wind creak, a weight shift. In the trees to the left, something moved between the trunks. I didn't see it clearly at first. I saw the absence of light where light should have been. A tall shape, too thin, moving low and then rising. Aaron lifted his camera, but his hands were shaking so badly the footage would have been useless. Luke's headlamp clicked on, cutting through the dusk like a blade. For a fraction of a second, the beam caught eye shine, too high off the ground to be a coyote, too far apart to be a deer, a hard yellow-white reflection. The shape ducked back. The whistle came again, closer this time, sounding mocking. Luke yelled, "Run!" We ran. We didn't sprint blindly. We ran like people who know that a broken ankle in the backcountry is a death sentence for your plans. But we ran fast, and we didn't stop until we hit a small flat area near the ridge crest, where the trees thinned enough that nothing could get close without being spotted. We set camp there in a frantic rush on rocky ground that made sleeping nearly impossible. We refused to go lower into the thicker cover in the dark. The sky turned purple. The first stars appeared. The cold settled in fast at that elevation. We were all breathing hard, chests tight, adrenaline buzzing under our skin. We didn't talk. We ate quickly, barely tasting the food. We hung our food bag anyway. Clinging to the routine was the only thing keeping me from feeling like the world was sliding away from reality.
That night, nothing came close enough to touch our tents. That might sound like a relief, but it wasn't. It felt like being watched from a distance, like whatever it was had realized we were jumpy and didn't need to press us anymore. We heard it out there though. We heard movement on the slope below, measured and patient. We heard a low sound, like someone humming under their breath. Once, we clearly heard the sound of rocks clicking together. 2 stones tapped 3 times, evenly spaced. At some point, when my body was exhausted enough that it tried to sleep anyway, I drifted off for minutes at a time. In one of those half-dream moments, I heard my daughter's voice. I don't even want to type this, it makes me sick, because my daughter wasn't there. She was safe at home. But I heard it, clear and small, calling Dad the way she does now. And it was wrong, because at the time of this trip, she couldn't have even made that sound yet. The timing didn't fit. The memory didn't fit. I sat up shaking. My tent was dark. The ridge was silent except for the wind, and from somewhere just beyond the edge of our camp, a voice said softly, almost kindly, "Come here." I pressed my palms against my eyes so hard I saw spots. I whispered to myself, "No." I didn't answer. I didn't move. Morning on October 2nd arrived with a hard blue sky and a cold that bit through my layers. We packed in near silence, running on that thin thread of determination you get when your only goal is to reach the car. The map showed a long day ahead. We started early, around 7 a.m., wanting the daylight on our side. The hike out was brutal in a way I can't explain without it sounding like a normal, difficult hike. The terrain wasn't technically hard, but everything felt heavier because we were carrying fear like an extra pack. Every time the trail dipped into thicker trees, my chest tightened. Every time the wind shifted and sounded like a whisper, my brain lit up. We didn't see the man in the hoodie again. We didn't see clear tracks. What we did see were small, deliberate markers that hadn't been there before. A line of stones placed on a fallen log, a strip of bark peeled off a tree at shoulder height, fresh and pale, and a deer skull on the side of the trail, clean and white, facing the path as if it had been set there as a sign. Tessa stopped at the skull and stared for a long time. "This is a message," she said finally. Luke asked, "What message?" Tessa's voice was flat, that it knows where we are, that it can wait. We kept moving. When we finally got within a couple of miles of the trailhead, the forest started to feel normal again in small ways. Birdsong, squirrels, the distant road noise you can't quite place but can feel in your bones. I started to cautiously believe we were going to make it out with nothing more than a story we'd tell in hushed tones and a few sleepless nights. Then we saw the truck. The driver's door was wide open. Luke broke into a run without thinking, and I chased after him, with Tessa and Aaron right on our heels. Even from a distance, the cab looked wrong. It looked like the interior had been disturbed. Luke reached the truck first and froze. The inside had been messed with, but not ransacked in a frantic way. It had been rearranged. The glove box was open, papers were spread across the seat, and the center console was lit up. Luke's spare headlamp, which he'd left in the truck, was sitting on the dashboard. It was turned on, its dying beam pointed at the windshield as if someone had wanted it to shine outward toward the trail. On the hood of the truck, in a thin layer of dust, there was a print, a single impression. It looked like a hoof, but it was blunt, heavy, and lacked the clean lines of a deer. Aaron took a photo, his voice shaking as he said, "That's not an elk." Luke just stood there staring, and I could see him struggling between the urge to laugh or throw up. Tessa climbed into the passenger seat and scanned the cab, her hands clenched. "Check the back," she said. We checked everything. No one was there. Nothing of value had been stolen, which almost made it worse. The satellite messenger was still with us. Our packs were still on our backs. The truck started right up when Luke turned the key. We piled in and locked the doors, as if that actually meant anything out there. As we pulled away, Aaron looked out the back window and went completely still. "Stop," he said. Luke slowed down. "What?" Aaron just pointed. There, at the edge of the tree line near the trailhead where the forest met the dirt pull-off, was a shape. It was tall, thin, and standing perfectly still. It wasn't waving or moving, it was just watching us. We stared at it through the glass. The distance, the heat shimmer, and the dust made it hard to see details. I couldn't make out a face, only a posture, upright and too rigid, like a person trying too hard to hold still. Then, as we watched, it moved. It dropped down low and fast, and for a second the shape looked like an animal on all fours. Not a deer, not a bear, something with a strange, efficient motion. Then it slipped into the trees and vanished. Luke drove. He didn't speak for a long time, and none of us did either. The road felt too bright, too open. Every time we passed another vehicle, my body flinched, expecting something to go wrong. When we finally hit a stretch of highway with real traffic, I felt the first tiny hint of relief. That night back home, Aaron sent the photos and audio to a shared folder. We went through everything like investigators because we had to. We needed to either find a rational explanation or prove to ourselves that we weren't losing it. Some of the files were corrupted, not all of them, but enough to be frustrating. The audio of the voices was there, but parts of it were clipped in odd places, as if the recording had cut out for half a second and then resumed. The video of the eye shine at dusk was mostly a shaky blur, but there was one frame Aaron pulled where between two trees you can see a pale shape that looks far too tall and too narrow to be an elk. It isn't definitive, it's not a smoking gun, it's the kind of evidence that makes skeptics roll their eyes and makes your stomach drop if you were actually there. Luke checked his satellite messenger log again the next morning. The timestamps were bizarre. There were entries that looked like attempts to send a check-in at times when we were all dead asleep. Not messages, just the device registering activity. Luke swore he hadn't touched it, and none of us had either. He said maybe it got bumped, then went quiet, because we all knew a bumped device doesn't repeatedly register activity in the small hours of the morning. Tessa didn't sleep for 2 nights after we got back. When she finally did, she texted us that she dreamed of her mother calling her from the trees. Aaron stopped hiking alone. Luke started triple locking his doors at night, something he'd never done before. And as for me, I tried to file it away. I tried to be the rational one. I told myself it was a person, some creep who followed us, messed with our truck, and used cheap tricks to mimic voices. There are people out there who do awful things for reasons that don't make sense. That is real and normal as evil gets. But then I remember the footprints by the creek. I remember the voice moved around us without the sound of footsteps. I remember the zipper tugging gently, like someone learning how tents work. I remember the camp with the warm ash and no tracks. I remember hearing Luke's whistle from 2 directions at once. I remember Tessa's face when that voice used her mother's tone, like it had reached into her memory and pulled out something private. I'm not saying I have proof. I'm not saying I know what it was. I'm saying we were 4 adults in the Arizona backcountry, experienced enough to know what normal feels like. And for 3 nights and 4 days, we were followed by something that learned us. It learned our sounds. It learned what made us turn our heads. It learned which names mattered. It got close when it wanted to, and stayed away when it didn't need to press. It touched our gear without leaving the signs a human leaves. It treated our routines like a puzzle. Since that trip, I've gone hiking again. I'm not going to pretend I've become someone who never steps into the woods, but I don't go there anymore. Not that area, not that route. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the AC cycles off, I catch myself listening for a sound outside that doesn't belong. Footsteps without weight. A voice that knows my name. A zipper tugging once, gently, like a hand testing whether I'm awake. If you take anything from this, let it be simple and boring. Don't answer voices you can't place. Don't split up. Don't assume a familiar sound means safety. And if you feel that steady, quiet sense that you're being watched, not jumpy paranoia, but that calm certainty in your bones, trust it. Turn around while it's your choice.
If you made it this far, you're braver than most. If you enjoyed the story, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more nightmares. Trust me, the next one is darker.